The Ohio interstate stretched before me like a ribbon of memories I'd tried to forget. 20 years. 20 years since I'd driven down this exact highway, past the same weathered billboards advertising local diners and farm equipment, past the rolling cornfields that had once felt like prison walls. My rental car hummed quietly through the afternoon heat, air conditioning fighting against the humid August air that clung to everything in this part of the Midwest. I checked my rearview mirror out of habit, a reflex that had been drilled into me through years of security protocols at the Pentagon. Clear road. Just me and the ghosts of a girl I used to be, heading toward a confrontation I'd been avoiding for 2 decades. The notification on my phone had arrived 3 weeks ago, innocent enough. Westfield High Class of 2005 20-year reunion. Don't miss this chance to reconnect. But it was the comment thread underneath that had made my blood run cold. Madison Crawford, God, she probably still went by her maiden name, had written, wondering if our little computer geek will actually show up. Probably still living in her mom's basement, coding away her lonely life. 43 likes. 43 people who remembered me as the awkward kid with thick glasses and second-hand clothes, hunched over a primitive laptop in the corner of the cafeteria while they lived their golden teenage dreams. They had no idea what that awkward kid had become. The exit sign for Westfield appeared ahead, green and familiar against the endless blue sky. Population 12, 847, exactly what it had been when I'd left for MIT on a full academic scholarship, swearing I'd never look back. The town hadn't grown. Neither, apparently, had the people in it. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Cyber Command. Colonel Sterling, situation developing in Eastern Europe. Your input needed Monday 0800. I smiled grimly. While Madison Crawford was planning reunion potluck assignments, I was helping prevent international incidents that could reshape global politics. While she was gossiping about who got fat or divorced, I was commanding a team of the most elite cyber warfare specialists in the world. But she didn't know that. None of them did. The familiar landmarks began appearing. Henderson's feed store, still with the same peeling paint. The old water tower with Eagles' 2003 state champs, still visible in faded blue letters. And then, like a punch to the gut, Westfield High School itself. The red brick building squatted on its hill like a monument to adolescent misery. The same American flag snapping in the breeze above the entrance where I'd walked through those doors every morning, invisible and insignificant. Or so they'd thought. I pulled into the parking lot of Miller's Diner, the same place where the popular kids used to hang out after games, the same place where I'd never been invited. Through the window, I could see a few early arrivals already gathering, their voices carrying across the parking lot in excited squeals of recognition. Designer handbags and carefully maintained highlights, the armor of suburban motherhood and middle management success. My own reflection stared back at me from the car window. 38 years old, still lean from military fitness requirements, wearing a simple black dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary but looked deliberately understated. No wedding ring, by choice, not circumstance. No children, by design, not failure. I'd built something bigger than a family. I'd built a fortress of national security that protected millions of families I'd never meet. Another text buzzed through. Nicole, can't wait to see you tonight. Hope you're doing well with your computer thing. My computer thing. If they only knew that my computer thing had prevented 3 major cyberattacks on U.S. infrastructure this year alone. If they only knew that the quiet girl they'd mocked for preferring machines to people had grown up to command machines that could level governments. But they were about to find out. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward my childhood home where my mother still lived, still proud, still keeping every newspaper clipping about her daughter's mysterious government work in a scrapbook she couldn't show to anyone. The reunion wasn't until tonight. I had time to prepare, time to decide exactly how much truth I was willing to reveal, time to choose between staying invisible and stepping into the light. The cornfields blurred past my window as I drove toward a reckoning 20 years in the making. Behind me, in the diner parking lot, the first whispers were probably already starting. Did you see Nicole Sterling drive by? Still alone, still weird, still that same sad little girl. They had no idea how wrong they were about to be. The memory hit me like a physical blow as I turned onto Maple Street. 20 years dissolved in an instant, and suddenly I was 18 again, clutching my battered Toshiba laptop against my chest like armor that had already failed me. It was a Tuesday in March, senior year. I'd been working on a program to optimize the school's ancient computer network, unpaid, unasked, simply because I couldn't stand watching outdated systems struggle. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual chaos, but I'd found my sanctuary at table 12 in the far corner, headphones blocking out the world while lines of code flowed across my screen. I should have seen them coming. Madison Crawford materialized beside my table like a predator sensing weakness. Even now, I could still smell her vanilla perfume, still see the cruel smile playing at her glossy lips. She was everything I wasn't: blonde, beautiful, effortlessly popular. Still playing with your little computer, Nicole. Her voice carried that particular tone reserved for creatures beneath notice. Don't you think it's time to join the real world? I'd looked up, blinking in the harsh, fluorescent light. Around us, conversations quieted as an audience gathered. Nothing drew a crowd like public humiliation. I'm working on something for the school, I'd mumbled, fingers hovering protectively over my keyboard. The network efficiency could be improved by 30% if... God, you're such a freak. Madison's laugh was like breaking glass. Nobody cares about your nerd stuff. You know what? I'm doing you a favor. Before I could react, she'd grabbed my chocolate milk carton and dumped it directly onto my laptop. The sweet brown liquid seeped between the keys, pooling on my circuit boards, destroying 3 months of work in an instant. The screen flickered once and died. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Not cruel laughter, that would have implied intent. This was worse. It was the reflexive laughter of pack animals, the sound of a social order reinforcing itself by destroying what it didn't understand. Oops, Madison said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. Technology is so fragile, isn't it? Just like the people who hide behind it. Brad Morrison, star quarterback and Madison's boyfriend, leaned over my table with a shark-like grin. Face it, Sterling, nobody's ever going to hire a weirdo like you. You'll probably end up in some basement somewhere, fixing computers for $5 an hour. Madison leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. You don't belong here, Nicole. Some people are born to lead, and some people are born to follow. Guess which one you are. I'd gathered the pieces of my ruined laptop and walked to the bathroom. There, in the sanctuary of a locked stall, I'd finally let myself cry. Not just for the laptop, though losing that code had felt like losing a piece of my soul, but for the crushing weight of being invisible, of being nothing. But in that bathroom stall, something else had been born alongside my tears. A cold, hard determination that crystallized like steel in my chest. They thought I was nothing. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I dried my eyes, squared my shoulders, and made a promise to that broken 18-year-old girl staring back at me from the grimy mirror. Someday, I would show them exactly what this weirdo was capable of. Now, as I pulled into my mother's driveway, I realized that someday had finally arrived. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its white siding slightly faded but still neat. Mom appeared on the front porch before I'd even turned off the engine, her face lighting up with pure joy. "Nicole, oh honey, you're finally home." Home. The word felt strange. This place had been my launching pad, not my destination. But looking at my mother's face, I realized that some things were worth coming back for, even if it meant facing the ghosts of cafeteria table 12. One more time. Mom's embrace was fierce, desperate, as if she could squeeze 20 years of missed hugs into this single moment. Over her shoulder, I could see the living room unchanged. Same floral wallpaper, same family photos. But there, in a place of honor above the fireplace, hung something that made my throat tighten. My MIT diploma, framed in gold, spotlighted like a shrine. "I know you told me not to make a big deal about your visit," Mom said, pulling back to study my face with a mother's practiced eye. "But I couldn't help myself. I made your favorite, pot roast and mashed potatoes." She had no idea I hadn't eaten pot roast in 15 years. Military MREs and Pentagon cafeteria salads had been my diet for so long I'd almost forgotten what real comfort food tasted like. "Tell me about work, honey," she said, bustling around the stove with nervous energy. "Are you still with that computer department?" Computer department. If she only knew that my computer department commanded a budget larger than most small countries' GDP, that my decisions could prevent, or potentially cause, international incidents with a few keystrokes. "Something like that, Mom. The transition from MIT to the Pentagon hadn't been planned. I'd intended to go private sector, maybe Silicon Valley. But during my senior year, a recruiter had appeared on campus. Not the usual corporate headhunter, but a quiet woman in a conservative blazer who asked very specific questions about my thesis on network vulnerability assessment. "We've been watching your work, Miss Sterling," she'd said over coffee in Harvard Square. "The Defense Department has some challenges that might interest someone with your particular talents." I'd laughed. "Thanks, but I'm not really the government type." She'd slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of cyberattacks on U.S. infrastructure, power grids, financial networks, military communications. Real attacks happening in real time that the public would never hear about. "This isn't about being a government type," she'd said quietly. "This is about being the type of person who prevents the lights from going out permanently." 3 months later, I was at Fort Gordon, Georgia, learning that everything I thought I knew about computer security was kindergarten level compared to what state-sponsored hackers could do. The other recruits were MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, the best and brightest. But they'd grown up comfortable, protected. They understood theory, but not desperation. I understood both. My first assignment had been defending against a coordinated attack on the East Coast power grid. 48 sleepless hours in a windowless room, fingers flying across keyboards, building digital barriers faster than they could be torn down. When the dust settled, 90 million people never knew how close they'd come to sitting in the dark for months. The promotion to first lieutenant came with a new assignment: Cyber Command at Fort Meade. Captain came after I'd prevented a banking system collapse that would have made 2008 look like a minor correction. Major, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel, each rank earned through invisible victories in a war most people didn't know was being fought. "You look tired, sweetie," Mom said, placing a steaming plate in front of me. "Are they working you too hard at that office?" That office, where yesterday I'd briefed the Joint Chiefs on a new threat vector emerging from Eastern Europe, where my team monitored 17 different global cyber conflicts simultaneously, where the weight of national security rested on algorithms I'd personally designed. "It keeps me busy," I said, taking a bite of pot roast that tasted exactly like childhood but somehow felt foreign. "I worry about you," she continued, settling into her chair. All those years, all that education, and you never talk about what you actually do. Sometimes I wonder if you're happy. Happy. The word seemed almost quaint. I wasn't sure happiness was the right metric for a life spent in the shadows, protecting people who would never know my name from threats they couldn't imagine. But fulfilled, purposeful, absolutely. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Mom. She smiled, the worried crease between her eyebrows smoothing slightly. Well, I suppose that's what matters. Now, tell me about this reunion tonight. Are you excited to see your old classmates? I thought about Madison Crawford's Facebook comment, about the laughter that had followed me out of that cafeteria 20 years ago, about the assumptions they'd made and the boxes they'd tried to force me into. You could say I'm looking forward to it, I said. Mom began clearing the dishes, humming softly. Through the kitchen window, I could see the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. In a few hours, I'd walk into that high school gymnasium and face the people who'd written me off as a failure before I'd even begun. They thought they knew Nicole Sterling, the weird computer girl, the social outcast, the one voted most likely to live in her parents' basement. Tonight, they'd meet Colonel Sterling instead, but first, I needed to prepare. After dinner, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, now converted into Mom's craft room but still containing my old desk. I opened my encrypted laptop and checked the secure channels. Even here, in small-town Ohio, the digital war never stopped. 3 priority alerts waited for me. A botnet attacking European financial networks. Suspicious activity targeting U.S. power infrastructure. A new malware variant that had our analysts concerned. I dispatched responses with practiced efficiency, my fingers moving across the keyboard in patterns that had become second nature. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Madison Crawford was probably deciding which designer dress to wear tonight, I was preventing her lights from going out permanently. My mind drifted back to my first real mission as a major. The call had come at 0300 on a Tuesday. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's voice had been tight with controlled urgency. "Sterling, we need you in the war room. Now." I'd driven through empty D.C. streets to the Pentagon, reaching the windowless chamber where America's digital defenders fought their invisible battles. Banks of monitors displayed network traffic from around the globe, red warning indicators flashing like emergency beacons. Coordinated attack on the eastern seaboard power grid, Chen had explained. Sophisticated, state-sponsored. They've been inside our systems for weeks. They're 15 minutes away from taking down everything from Boston to Richmond. 15 minutes. In cyber warfare, that was an eternity if you knew what you were doing. And I knew exactly what I was doing. I'd traced the attack vectors, identified the compromised nodes, built digital walls faster than they could tear them down. My team worked in synchronized silence, each commanding different aspects of the defense. No Hollywood dramatics, just pure technical expertise against an adversary who'd underestimated American cyber warriors. When the dust settled 72 hours later, 90 million people went about their daily lives, never knowing they'd been 15 minutes away from sitting in darkness for months. The promotion to lieutenant colonel had come with heading up the Advanced Persistent Threat Division. Colonel had followed a successful operation I couldn't discuss with anyone lacking compartmented clearance, including my mother, who still thought I worked in some computer department. A soft knock interrupted my reverie. Mom appeared with chamomile tea, her worried expression suggesting she'd been watching me work. "Honey, don't you think you should get ready for the reunion?" I glanced at my watch. 6:15. Time to transform from Colonel Sterling, director of Cybercom, into Nicole, whoever she was supposed to be tonight. She lingered in the doorway, then stepped into the room and sat on my old twin bed. You know, after what happened in high school, with those awful children, I was so afraid you'd lost your confidence forever. But watching you now, seeing the woman you've become, I'm so proud of who you are. If she only knew that her daughter commanded a cyber warfare division with a classified budget, that foreign governments considered me a strategic threat, that my digital fingerprints protected critical infrastructure across 17 allied nations. Thanks, Mom. That means everything. I closed the encrypted channels and opened a different kind of preparation. Time to research my former classmates, not out of malice but professional habit. Know your environment. Assess all players. Madison Crawford's social media painted suburban mediocrity wrapped in designer labels. Divorced twice, currently hawking essential oils through MLM, posting inspirational quotes while her LinkedIn showed a 3-year resume gap. Brad Morrison, who'd predicted I'd end up in someone's basement, was living in his mother's basement after failed real estate ventures and bankruptcy. I shut the laptop and began getting ready. Black dress, simple but well cut, minimal jewelry, conservative makeup. I wanted to blend in initially to observe before revealing. As I checked my reflection, my secure phone buzzed. Situation nominal. Enjoy your leave, Colonel. In 2 hours, I would walk into that gymnasium and face the people who'd tried to define my limitations 20 years ago. They were about to discover they'd been catastrophically wrong about those limitations. The reconnaissance phase was complete, but intelligence gathering never truly ended. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, watching the familiar street come alive with Friday evening activity. Neighbors watering lawns, kids riding bikes, the peaceful rhythm of small-town life that I'd once been desperate to escape. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my deputy. Colonel, Iranian cyber activity spiking. Monitoring situation. Will advise if immediate response needed. I typed back. Acknowledged. Maintain DEFCON 3 posture. I'm reachable. Even on leave, even in Ohio, I remained tethered to a world where digital warfare could escalate to kinetic conflict in minutes. But tonight, my battlefield would be a high school gymnasium, and my weapons would be 20 years of achievements my former classmates couldn't begin to comprehend. I pulled up Madison Crawford's social media one final time, analyzing her posts with the same methodical approach I used for threat assessment. The pattern was clear, surface-level success masking deeper insecurities. Her latest Instagram story showed her getting ready for tonight. Designer dress, professional makeup, hashtags about glowing up, and showing everyone how far I've come. The irony was almost painful. She thought tonight was about proving herself to people whose opinions had ceased to matter the moment she peaked in high school. She still lived in the same ecosystem, where social validation determined worth, where appearance mattered more than substance. I'd left that ecosystem behind the day I walked onto MIT's campus and discovered a world where intelligence was currency and innovation was power. The contrast between our trajectories told a story that sociologists would find fascinating. Madison had married young, divorced twice, bounced between jobs that required more charisma than competence. Her current venture, selling essential oils through multi-level marketing, was the kind of pseudo-entrepreneurship that preyed on women looking for purpose in suburban emptiness. Meanwhile, I'd spent the last decade building defensive systems that protected millions of people from adversaries they'd never know existed. My decisions influenced national policy. My algorithms safeguarded critical infrastructure. Foreign intelligence services knew my work, even if they didn't know my name. The psychological profiles were equally revealing. Brad Morrison's Facebook timeline read like a textbook case of arrested development, still posting about his high school football glory days, still using the same swagger that had worked on 18-year-olds, but fell flat in the adult world. His business failures weren't just bad luck. They were the inevitable result of someone who'd never learned that charm without competence was worthless in markets that didn't care about your quarterback stats. His current living situation, back in his childhood bedroom after a foreclosure, would have been humiliating for someone with self-awareness. But Brad's posts suggested he saw it as temporary, a minor setback before his next big comeback. 20 years of evidence to the contrary hadn't dented his self-image. These weren't bad people, necessarily. They were simply people who'd been given early advantages, looks, charisma, social connections, and had mistaken those advantages for permanent assets. They'd never learned to build anything lasting because they'd never needed to. High school had been their peak, and everything since had been decline disguised as maintenance. I'd taken the opposite trajectory. High school had been my valley, the lowest point from which everything else was ascent. Every humiliation had become fuel. Every exclusion had sharpened my focus. Every moment of being underestimated had prepared me for a world where results mattered more than popularity. The military had given me structure, but I'd given myself purpose. The Pentagon had provided resources, but I'd provided the vision to use them effectively. My achievements weren't inherited or gifted. They were earned through thousands of hours of work that my former classmates couldn't have imagined undertaking. A text from Mom interrupted my analysis. "Honey, you should leave soon. The reunion starts at 7 and you know how parking gets." I checked my watch. 6:30. Time to transition from intelligence analyst to, what? The weird girl seeking validation. The successful professional proving a point. Neither felt right. I was Colonel Nicole Sterling, director of Cybercom, defender of American digital infrastructure. I didn't need their validation, because I'd found something infinitely more valuable. Purpose that transcended personal recognition. But I was also still that 18-year-old girl who'd sat alone at table 12, whose laptop had been destroyed by casual cruelty, who'd promised herself in a bathroom stall that someday she'd show them who she really was. Tonight, both versions of myself would walk into that gymnasium, and only one would matter by the time I left. I gathered my keys and headed downstairs, where Mom waited by the front door with a camera and a mother's proud smile. She had no idea she was about to witness the conclusion of a psychological operation 20 years in the making. The enemy had no idea what was coming. "Oh, honey, you look beautiful," Mom said, snapping photos like I was heading to prom instead of a carefully orchestrated mission. "I'm so excited for you to see everyone again." I submitted to the maternal photo session, understanding that this ritual was as important to her as mission briefings were to me. In her world, reunions were about reconnection and nostalgia. In mine, they were battlefield assessments with predetermined objectives. "Mom, I need you to understand something," I said, gently taking her hands. "Tonight might not go exactly as you expect." Her smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean, sweetie?" How could I explain without revealing classified information? How could I tell her that her daughter wasn't just successful, but that I occupied a position of authority most people couldn't comprehend? That the computer skills she'd watched me develop in this very house had evolved into capabilities that foreign governments actively sought to counter? "I've grown a lot since high school. Some people might be surprised." She squeezed my hands, her maternal instincts sensing undercurrents she couldn't identify. "Just be yourself, Nicole. That's all you've ever needed to be." Be myself. The irony was that I'd spent 20 years becoming someone these people never imagined I could be. The girl they'd dismissed as a social misfit had grown into a woman who commanded respect in rooms where national security decisions were made. But Mom was right about one thing. I'd always been myself. They'd simply been too limited to recognize what that meant. The drive to Westfield High took 12 minutes, the same route I'd walked every day for 4 years. Past the corner store where I'd bought lunch with pocket change. Past the library where I'd spent countless hours teaching myself programming languages the school didn't offer. Past the park where I'd sat alone reading computer science textbooks while other kids socialized. Every landmark held memories, but they felt distant now, like artifacts from someone else's life. The girl who'd walked these streets had been driven by desperation to escape. The woman driving them now was motivated by curiosity, anthropological interest in observing how the past had crystallized into the present. My phone buzzed with another encrypted update from Cybercom. I read it while stopped at a red light. Colonel, Iranian probe intensifying. Recommend elevated monitoring protocols. I typed back. Authorized. Brief General Morrison at 0800 tomorrow. I'll be back online Sunday evening. The juxtaposition struck me as almost surreal. I was simultaneously managing a potential international cyber incident and preparing to face people who thought my biggest accomplishment was probably getting a government desk job. They existed in parallel universes, one where digital warfare could destabilize nations, another where high school social hierarchies still seemed to matter. The school parking lot was already half full, BMWs and Mercedes mixed with practical SUVs and pickup trucks. I parked my rental car, a deliberately modest sedan, between a lifted Ford and a minivan covered in soccer mom decals. Camouflage wasn't just military doctrine, it was operational necessity. Through my windshield, I could see small groups forming and reforming as people recognized each other. The body language was fascinating from a behavioral analysis perspective. The popular crowd clustered near the main entrance, their posture radiating the same confidence they'd possessed at 18. The quieter students hung back, approaching tentatively, still seeking permission to join conversations they'd been excluded from decades earlier. Some patterns never changed. Some people never grew. I sat in my car for another moment, watching Madison Crawford hold court near the gymnasium doors. She wore a red dress that screamed expensive desperation, her gestures animated as she regaled her audience with what I assumed were stories about her fabulous life. Her entire performance was calibrated for maximum impact, designed to project success whether or not substance supported the image. Brad Morrison stood beside her, his high school swagger intact despite the softness around his middle and the slight desperation in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He still commanded attention through sheer force of personality, but I could see the effort it required now, the way he had to work for reactions that had once come effortlessly. They were performing roles they'd mastered 20 years ago, unaware that the audience had evolved while they'd remained static. They still believed charisma could substitute for competence, that charm could compensate for achievement, that high school popularity was currency that never lost its value. They were wrong on all counts. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror one final time. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, conservative makeup. I looked successful but not threatening, professional but not intimidating. The perfect camouflage for someone who needed to observe before revealing the scope of what they'd underestimated. My secure phone displayed one final message. "Enjoy your evening, Colonel. We'll hold down the fort." I smiled at the screen. They had no idea that their colonel was about to engage in the most important psychological operation of her career. Time to show my former classmates what strategic patience and tactical precision could accomplish. Time to demonstrate the difference between temporary advantages and permanent capabilities. I stepped out of my car and felt the humid August evening wrap around me. The sounds of the reunion drifted across the parking lot. Laughter, excited voices, the occasional squeal of recognition. It was the soundtrack of people reliving their glory days, blissfully unaware that some of their former classmates had been writing entirely different stories. The walk to the gymnasium entrance felt like crossing no man's land. Eyes turned toward me as I approached, curiosity flickering across faces that took a moment to place me. I could see the mental calculations happening, trying to match the confident woman in the simple black dress with their memories of the awkward teenager. Nicole Sterling. The voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, who'd been part of Madison's inner circle but never cruel, just absent. "Oh my God, you look amazing. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you," I replied, my voice carrying the controlled confidence that came from briefing 4-star generals. "How have you been?" "Good. I'm married now, 3 kids, living in Dayton. I teach elementary school." She paused, searching for safe conversational ground. "What about you? What are you up to these days?" The question I'd been preparing for. "I work for the government. Nothing too exciting, mostly computer-related stuff." Her relief was palpable. She'd found a box to put me in. Government work was respectable but not threatening. Computer stuff was what she'd expected from the girl who'd always been hunched over a keyboard. "That's wonderful. Are you married? Kids?" "No children, no husband. I travel quite a bit for work." Another box checked. The career woman who'd sacrificed family for professional success. Perfect camouflage. We exchanged pleasantries before she excused herself. I continued toward the entrance, noting how the crowd seemed to part slightly as I moved through it. 20 years of military bearing left its mark, even when you were trying to blend in. The gymnasium had been transformed with enthusiastic decoration, streamers in school colors, tables with plastic tablecloths, a DJ playing early 2000s hits. I accepted a name tag from a volunteer who consulted her list twice before finding my name. "Nicole Sterling, you were in my AP history class. I'm Sarah Chen now, used to be Sarah Miller." I remembered her. Quiet, studious, caught between the popular kids and outcasts. She'd never been cruel, but she'd never intervened either. She launched into details about her husband's medical practice and children's achievements. I listened with the patience developed from countless briefings while scanning the room for primary targets. Madison was impossible to miss. She commanded the center of the room like a general holding court, her red dress a deliberate flag planted in social territory she still considered hers. Her audience had grown, a mix of former popular kids and hangers-on who still sought her approval. Brad stood beside her, his arm casually draped around her shoulders, suggesting their high school romance had been rekindled. His eyes swept the room with predatory confidence of someone who'd never learned that charm had an expiration date. "What about you? Do you ever think about having children?" Sarah asked. "My work keeps me pretty busy," I replied. "I'm involved in some projects that require a lot of attention. Projects like preventing cyber warfare from escalating into kinetic conflict, like maintaining digital infrastructure that kept lights on and banks functioning, like protecting 17 allied nations from state-sponsored attacks." But Sarah didn't need to know that. Not yet. As she disappeared into the crowd, I assessed the battlefield. The gymnasium buzzed with people performing their best selves, everyone projecting success whether reality supported the image. Groups clustered around shared memories, the same social dynamics that had governed this space 20 years earlier. Near the memorial table, I spotted the genuinely successful ones. David Park, who'd started a tech company in Seattle. Lisa Rodriguez, who'd become a federal prosecutor. They moved with quiet confidence, comfortable in achievements but not needing to broadcast them. And then there was my corner of the ecosystem, the absent ones, whose lives had taken them too far from this place to bother coming back. The ones who'd found bigger stages and more important audiences. Except I had come back. And in about an hour, when they opened the floor for announcements, I was going to remind everyone exactly why strategic patience was superior to temporary popularity. Madison's laughter carried across the room, sharp and commanding. She still thought this was her kingdom, that these people were still her subjects. She was about to learn how power structures could shift when real authority entered the room. I moved through the crowd with deliberate casualness, accepting greetings from classmates who remembered me vaguely, their surprise evident as they tried to reconcile the confident woman before them with their memories of the social outcast. Each interaction was brief, polite, unremarkable, exactly as I intended. But Madison had spotted me. I felt her gaze like a sniper's crosshairs, tracking my movement across the gymnasium floor. When I glanced in her direction, she was whispering something to Brad, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at me. The hunter had identified her prey, or so she thought. I continued my reconnaissance, letting her watch, letting her build confidence in whatever strategy she was forming. Sun Tzu had written about appearing weak when you were strong, about letting your enemy underestimate you until the moment of decisive action. 20 minutes passed before she made her move. I was standing near the refreshment table when Madison approached with her entourage in tow. Brad flanked her right side, Jennifer Walsh to her left, and 2 former cheerleaders completed her formation. Classic pack tactics. Establish numerical superiority, create an audience for the humiliation. Nicole Sterling. Madison's voice carried across the immediate area, causing conversations to pause as heads turned toward the developing drama. Her smile was predatory perfection. I almost didn't recognize you. You look so different. The emphasis on different was deliberate. Not better, not worse, just different in a way that suggested something indefinable was off. "Hello, Madison," I replied, my voice neutral and professional. "You look exactly the same." Which was true, and we both knew it wasn't entirely a compliment. She'd maintained her high school appearance through considerable effort, but the effect was somehow desperate. A woman clinging to an expired identity. Her smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. She'd expected me to be intimidated, to revert to the nervous teenager who'd cowered at her approach. "So tell us," she continued, her voice rising to ensure maximum audience participation. "What have you been up to all these years? I heard you're working for the government now. How civic-minded of you." The subtle dig was expertly delivered. Government work was respectable but boring, the kind of career that screamed, peaked in college. "I do work in government, yes," I confirmed. "That's wonderful. What department? Are you like filing paperwork or working with computers? I remember you always had your nose buried in that old laptop." The memory of chocolate milk soaking into my keyboard flashed between us. She was reminding me, and everyone within earshot, of my lowest moment in this building. "I work with computers, among other things," I said. Brad stepped forward, his quarterback swagger still intact despite the softness around his middle. "Let me guess, IT support, help desk. That's perfect for you, Nicole. I always said you were good with that technical stuff." The dismissiveness was casual, automatic. In his worldview, technical competence was a service position, something people like me did for people like him. "Something like that," I agreed. Madison sensed victory. Her smile became genuinely warm. Well, that's just perfect. Stable government job, good benefits. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur like me. She gestured to herself with practiced humility. I've actually built quite an empire with my wellness consulting. Essential oils, life coaching, helping women discover their authentic selves. The MLM pitch was subtle but unmistakable. I'd seen her social media, knew about the financial struggles hidden beneath the Instagram-worthy lifestyle. That sounds fulfilling, I said and meant it. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward with forced brightness. What about family, Nicole? Are you married? Kids? The question was meant to be the knockout blow. In Madison's social ecosystem, professional achievement without traditional family markers was incomplete success. No husband, no children, I confirmed. My work requires quite a bit of travel. The sympathy was immediate and devastating. These women saw my single status as confirmation of everything they'd always believed about me. Poor Nicole, so focused on her computer job that she'd missed out on what really mattered. Madison's expression was pure triumph. She'd successfully reduced me to my teenage status, the weird girl who'd chosen machines over human connection. Well, she said, her voice dripping with manufactured compassion, I'm sure the right person will come along eventually. Maybe try some of my confidence-building workshops. The sales pitch wrapped in sympathy was the perfect finishing move. She'd positioned herself as both superior and generous. Around us, I could sense the crowd's satisfaction. This was the reunion narrative they'd come to see. Popular kids still successful, weird kids still weird, everyone safely in their predetermined boxes. But I'd let them play out their script. I'd gathered the intelligence I needed, assessed their strategies, confirmed their weaknesses. Now it was time for them to meet the real Nicole Sterling. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire. Madison basked in what she perceived as her victory, her entourage nodding along with practiced synchronization. Around us, the crowd had grown, drawn by the unmistakable scent of social drama unfolding. But something in my expression must have shifted, because Madison's smile faltered slightly. Perhaps it was the way I straightened my shoulders, or the subtle change in my posture that 2 decades of military bearing had ingrained. You know, Madison, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet circle, I've always found it interesting how some people peak early and spend the rest of their lives trying to recapture that moment. The words landed like precision strikes. Her smile became brittle, frozen in place by social conditioning that demanded she maintain composure even as the ground shifted beneath her feet. Brad stepped closer, his territorial instincts kicking in. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to him with the kind of calm attention I usually reserved for briefing defense contractors. It means that while you were reliving your glory days as quarterback, some of us were building something that actually mattered. Like what? Madison's voice had an edge now, the polished veneer cracking. Your little government job, filing reports and fixing computer problems. The crowd sensed blood in the water. Phones were emerging from purses. This would be social media content by midnight. Computer problems, I repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose you could call them that. Jennifer Walsh tried to diffuse the situation. I'm sure Nicole has a very important job. Oh, I'm sure it is, Madison interrupted, reclaiming control. But let's be honest about what it really is. Some people are born to lead and some people are born to follow. Some people build empires and some people work for the government. She delivered the final phrase like it was a terminal diagnosis. In her worldview, government employment was the refuge of the unambitious. Build empires, I mused, like your essential oils business. The question hit like a sledgehammer. Madison's MLM venture was her primary claim to entrepreneurial success, and we both knew it was built on financial desperation. I help people transform their lives, she said defensively. I've built a six-figure business from nothing. I employ dozens of women across 3 states. Employ, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what you call it when you recruit people to buy inventory they can't sell? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. MLM schemes were a touchy subject. Everyone knew someone who'd lost money on wellness products. Brad moved closer, his face flushing with anger. You've got some nerve, Sterling. Madison's built something real while you've been hiding behind a desk somewhere, taking taxpayer money to do God knows what. God knows what, I echoed. That's an interesting phrase, Brad. Tell me, what do you think I do all day in my little government job? Push papers, he said with contempt. Answer phones, fix people's email when it breaks. Exactly what we all knew you'd end up doing, the same stuff you did in high school, just with a paycheck. The dismissiveness was absolute, complete. In his mind, I was still the awkward teenager who'd hidden behind technology because I couldn't navigate the real world. Madison sensed the moment was right to deliver the killing blow. Her smile returned, bright and vicious. The truth is, Nicole, some of us grew up and built real lives. We got married, had children, created businesses, made impacts in our communities. She gestured around the circle. While you were playing with computers in some basement office, we were living in the real world. The attack was comprehensive and personal. She'd reduced my entire adult life to an extended adolescence, a failure to engage with meaningful markers of success. Playing with computers, I said softly, in a basement office. The repetition seemed to amuse her. She'd found her rhythm now, sensing victory within reach. I mean, it's fine, she continued with false magnanimity. Not everyone can be a leader. Someone has to do the technical work, right? Someone has to be the support staff while other people make the important decisions. Support staff. The phrase crystallized everything she believed about me, about technology workers, about anyone whose contributions weren't immediately visible or socially prestigious. The crowd was fully engaged now, sensing we'd reached the climax of whatever drama had been building. This was better than any planned entertainment, a real confrontation between former classmates. But as I looked around the circle of expectant faces, I realized something profound. These people weren't just witnessing a reunion confrontation. They were about to receive a master class in the difference between perceived authority and actual power. The moment had arrived. 20 years of preparation, 20 years of building capabilities they couldn't imagine, 20 years of serving a mission larger than their small-town social hierarchies. Time to show them what real authority looked like. Time to introduce them to Colonel Sterling. But before I could speak, a voice cut through the tension from behind the crowd. Nicole Sterling, is that really you? Heads turned toward the approaching figure, a distinguished man in his late 50s wearing a simple but well-tailored suit. Principal Carter, though grayer than I remembered, still carried himself with the quiet authority that had made him respected by students who respected no one else. He pushed through the circle with confidence. Nicole Sterling, he said, genuinely pleased. I didn't expect to see you here. Principal Carter, I replied, surprised. I make it a point to attend reunions when possible, he said, his eyes twinkling. Especially when I hear that certain distinguished alumni are in attendance. The word distinguished hung in the air. Madison's confidence flickered. This wasn't part of her script. Mr. Carter, she said, deploying charm that had worked on teachers 20 years ago. We were just catching up with Nicole about her government work. It's so nice that she found something suitable. Carter's expression suggested he wasn't buying what she was selling. Suitable, he repeated thoughtfully. He turned to address the growing crowd. You know, folks, I've been following the careers of our graduates for decades. It's particularly gratifying when a student who is undervalued by their peers goes on to achieve something truly extraordinary. Madison's smile became strained. The authority figure was supposed to be neutral, not taking sides. "Now, I hope you won't mind," Carter said, his tone becoming formal. "But we have a tradition at these reunions. We like to recognize our most accomplished graduates." He gestured toward the far end of the gymnasium, where a projection screen was being lowered. "This year, we're particularly honored to highlight one of our own who's achieved something quite remarkable in service to our country." My blood ran cold. This wasn't part of any plan I'd made. I'd intended to control the revelation with surgical precision. "Mr. Carter," I said quickly, "I don't think that's necessary." "Nonsense," he interrupted with firm kindness. "False modesty doesn't suit someone of your accomplishments." He turned back to the crowd, which had grown to include most of the reunion attendees. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet one of Westfield High's most distinguished graduates, someone who spent the last 2 decades serving our nation in ways most of us can barely comprehend." Madison looked confused now, her narrative crumbling. The crowd was paying attention to Carter instead of her. "Many of you remember Nicole as the quiet girl who was always working on computers," Carter continued. "What you probably don't know is that those computer skills caught the attention of some very important people in Washington." The screen flickered to life, displaying the official seal of the Department of Defense. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Nicole Sterling graduated from MIT with highest honors and was immediately recruited by the Department of Defense. She spent her career protecting American cyber infrastructure from threats most of us never know exist." The murmur grew louder. Words like Department of Defense carried weight even for people who didn't understand their implications. Carter reached into his jacket and withdrew an official document. "In fact, I received this yesterday from the Pentagon's Office of Public Affairs, specifically for tonight's reunion." My heart hammered. This was spiraling beyond my control. The Pentagon wanted to ensure that Nicole's hometown properly recognized her contributions to national security, Carter continued, unfolding the document. "This is an official commendation acknowledging her service as Director of Cyber Operations Command." Director of Cyber Operations Command. The words hit like a physical force. These weren't harmless bureaucratic titles. This was something that carried authority they couldn't dismiss. Madison's face had gone white. Brad looked punched in the stomach. "Furthermore," Carter said, clearly enjoying the moment, "the Pentagon specifically requested that I share Nicole's current military rank." Military rank? I wasn't just a government employee. I wasn't just a computer technician. I was a commissioned officer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with authority, "I present to you Colonel Nicole Sterling, Director of the United States Cyber Command." The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and devastating. The girl they'd mocked for playing with computers had grown up to command America's digital defense systems. The weirdo they'd dismissed as support staff was a full colonel in the United States military. Madison's empire of essential oils suddenly seemed very, very small. The silence stretched like a chasm, filled only by the hum of the gymnasium's ventilation system and the distant sound of someone's phone hitting the floor. 300 people stood frozen in a moment of collective recalibration, their minds struggling to process the complete inversion of everything they thought they knew. I watched Madison's face cycle through the stages of psychological shock. Denial flickered in her eyes. This had to be some kind of mistake, some elaborate joke. Then came the desperate search for escape routes, her gaze darting around the circle as if looking for someone to contradict what she just heard. Finally, the crushing weight of reality settled over her features like a death mask. Colonel. The word reverberated through the crowd with the force of a revelation that changed everything retroactively. Every dismissive comment, every condescending smile, every assumption about my limitations, all of it collapsed under the weight of two silver eagles that represented authority they couldn't comprehend or diminish. Brad Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The quarterback who'd predicted I'd end up fixing computers in someone's basement was staring at a woman who commanded the digital battlefield where nations won or lost without firing a shot. "Colonel," someone whispered from the back of the crowd, and the word rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Principal Carter stepped forward, clearly pleased with the effect his announcement had produced. "Perhaps you'd like to tell them a little about your work, Nicole. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to hear what protecting America's cyber infrastructure actually involves." Every eye in the gymnasium was fixed on me now. The girl they'd mocked for hiding behind technology had grown up to wield technology as a weapon of national defense. The weirdo who'd preferred machines to people now commanded machines that could bring down governments. I took a breath, feeling the weight of 20 years of hidden truth finally lifting from my shoulders. "Cyber Command," I began, my voice carrying the measured authority that came from briefing presidents and prime ministers, "is responsible for defending American digital infrastructure against state-sponsored attacks. We monitor and counter threats from hostile nations attempting to compromise our power grids, financial systems, military communications, and civilian networks." The technical language washed over them like a foreign tongue, but certain phrases penetrated. State-sponsored attacks, military communications, defending America. These weren't the responsibilities of a support technician or a government clerk. "Last month," I continued, watching their faces as the implications sank in, "my team prevented a coordinated attack on the eastern seaboard power grid that would have left 90 million people without electricity for potentially months. 2 weeks ago, we neutralized a banking system intrusion that could have triggered an economic collapse comparable to 2008. Jennifer Walsh's hand flew to her mouth. The scope of what I was describing, the scale of responsibility, the national security implications, was so far beyond their civilian experience that it might as well have been science fiction. But I wasn't finished. 20 years of underestimation demanded thorough correction. The work requires top-secret clearance with special compartmented access. I brief the National Security Council monthly on emerging cyber threats. My recommendations influence foreign policy decisions at the highest levels of government. Madison's red dress seemed to blur at the edges as the blood drained from her face. Her carefully constructed empire of wellness consulting and essential oil sales had just been revealed as what it truly was: a desperate scramble for relevance in a world where real power was measured in different currencies entirely. "The reason I travel so much," I said, my gaze settling on the circle of people who dismissed my single status as evidence of failure, "is because cyber warfare doesn't respect national boundaries. I've coordinated defensive operations with allied nations across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. I've testified before congressional committees on matters of national security that remain classified." Brad's swagger had completely evaporated. The man who'd characterized my work as pushing papers was realizing that my papers influenced the safety and security of the nation he claimed to love. "The Pentagon," I continued, savoring each word like vintage wine. It considers cyber warfare to be the fifth domain of military operations, alongside land, sea, air, and space. As Director of Cyber Command, I'm responsible for defending America in a theater of combat that most people don't even know exists. A theater of combat. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge to every assumption they'd ever made about what constituted important work, meaningful contribution, or adult success. Carter stepped forward again, his timing impeccable. Nicole's been awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star for her contributions to national security. Military decorations. The kind of honors that went far beyond civilian recognition, that represented service to something larger than personal advancement or financial gain. I reached into my purse and withdrew the item I'd carried with me every day for the past 5 years. My Pentagon identification badge, with its distinctive coloring and security features that marked me as someone with access to the nation's most sensitive facilities. I held it up so everyone could see the official seal, the classification markings, the photograph that showed me in military dress uniform with the silver eagles of a full colonel clearly visible on my shoulders. "This isn't a business card from some government cubicle," I said quietly. "This is authorization to access facilities where decisions are made that affect the security of every person in this room." The gymnasium had become a museum of shocked silence. 300 people who'd thought they understood the social hierarchy, who'd believed that high school popularity translated into adult significance, were discovering that they'd been operating with incomplete information for 20 years. Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I had no idea. No, I agreed, my voice gentle but implacable. You had no idea. None of you did, because you were so busy congratulating yourselves on your high school victories that you never bothered to wonder what the quiet girl might become when she found her battlefield. The moment crystallized everything, not just my personal vindication, but the broader truth about how society valued different kinds of strength, different forms of intelligence, different paths to significance. I looked around the circle one final time, at faces that would never again carry the casual dismissiveness they'd shown an hour earlier. "Computer problems," I said, echoing Madison's earlier words. "Yes, I suppose preventing World War III does qualify as solving computer problems." The girl they'd destroyed in the cafeteria 20 years ago had grown up to defend the cafeterias of America from enemies they couldn't imagine. And now, finally, they knew it. The aftermath unfolded with quiet precision. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, but the social dynamics had fundamentally shifted. People approached me with respect that bordered on reverence, their questions careful and deferential. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by the awkward deference civilians showed to military authority they couldn't ignore. Madison had disappeared entirely, slipping out through a side exit. Brad lingered near the refreshment table, his swagger replaced by shell-shocked expression. The popular crowd that had once orbited around them now drifted toward me, drawn by the gravitational pull of actual achievement. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh approached as the program wound down. "Nicole," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for 20 years ago. I was there when Madison destroyed your laptop. I saw what happened and I did nothing." Her honesty was disarming. "Thank you for saying that, Jennifer. I've thought about that day so many times. I should have stood up for you. I was a coward." "You were 18, I replied. We all were. The person you've become matters more than who you were in high school. She smiled genuinely. My daughter Emma is a lot like you were, quiet, brilliant, obsessed with computers. After tonight, I'm going to make sure she knows that being different isn't something to hide from. That conversation was worth more than all the awkward congratulations combined. As the evening wound down, I found myself in the parking lot, processing what had occurred. My secure phone buzzed. Situation in Eastern Europe escalating. Your guidance needed tomorrow 0900. Tomorrow, I would return to windowless rooms where America's digital wars were fought. I would brief analysts, coordinate with allied nations, and make decisions affecting government stability. The reunion would become a memory, filed alongside other psychological operations I'd conducted. But tonight had been about more than personal vindication. It demonstrated a fundamental truth extending far beyond Westfield High School. The metrics society uses to measure success, popularity, charisma, conventional achievement, are often inversely related to qualities that create lasting impact. Students who peak in high school frequently lack resilience to excel when rules change. Outcasts who survive adolescence often develop intellectual toughness required for extraordinary achievement. Madison's empire was built on convincing women to buy products they couldn't sell. My empire protected infrastructure that kept civilization functioning. One contribution would matter in a decade. The other wouldn't matter in a year. As I drove toward my mother's house, I reflected on the evening's strange circularity. I'd returned to where I'd once felt powerless and discovered I'd become more powerful than anyone imagined. But the real victory wasn't proving them wrong about my limitations. It was proving myself right about my potential. The 18-year-old who'd sat alone at table 12 hadn't been hiding from the world. She'd been preparing for it. Every hour coding while classmates socialized, every rejection that forced self-reliance, every moment of isolation that taught strength in solitude, all of it had been training for a life of consequence. High school had been my boot camp. The Pentagon was my battlefield. The war I fought protected people who'd never know my name, including those who'd spent 20 years underestimating my capabilities. Later, reviewing encrypted briefings in my childhood bedroom, I realized something profound. I no longer needed their validation because I'd found something infinitely more valuable, purpose that transcended personal recognition. The girl mocked for preferring computers to people had grown up to use computers to protect people. The weirdo dismissed as antisocial had become a guardian of society itself. The failure written off as unmarketable had become invaluable to free world security. That was the real victory, not proving them wrong, but proving their opinions had never mattered. Some battles are won with weapons. Others are won with patience, preparation, and quiet determination to become extraordinary in a world celebrating the ordinary. 20 years ago, they'd tried to define my limitations. Tonight, I'd shown them what happens when you refuse to accept other people's definitions of what's possible. The best revenge isn't success. It's becoming so successful that revenge becomes irrelevant. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, know that your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. Subscribe to Honor Vindicated for more stories of resilience and quiet strength that changes the world. Stay strong, stay focused, and remember, the people who matter will see your value.